The stars flickered outside the window of the Earth Command Center, distant lights against an inky sea of black. Inside, the hum of consoles and the murmurs of military strategists blended into a tense harmony. A delicate balance of anticipation and dread hung in the air as Earth's leaders sat in silence. The alliance had always been precarious, built on fragile trust and fragile treaties. But the Valkyrie, a rogue warship long thought lost to history, had just emerged on the outskirts of the solar system, its massive silhouette eclipsing the sun. Captain Lucille Alvarez stood at the front of the room, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the holographic display. Her heart raced, though her face remained a mask of professionalism. She was no stranger to military strategy, no stranger to the weight of command. But this felt different. There was something ancient, something terrifying about the presence of the Valkyrie, a vessel once lost to the myths of galactic war, believed to be a relic of a time before humanity had even dared venture into the stars. Her hand hovered over the console, ready to speak, but the silence stretched on. Earth was on the edge of a precipice, teetering between diplomacy and annihilation. But who could negotiate with a ship like that, with an enemy that was nothing short of a legend? The briefing had been brief, but the implications were clear. Earth's defenses, though formidable, were no match for the Valkyrie's technology. For weeks, humanity had monitored the movements of this lone warship. Ella, the captain of the Valkyrie, was an enigma, a woman forged in the fire of cosmic war, a leader whose name struck fear across galaxies. And now, she had set her sights on Earth. Lucille closed her eyes, her fingers brushing the cold surface of the command console. A decision had to be made. Earth had to choose whether to submit, to beg for mercy, or to resist. She knew that the right choice might not always be the obvious one. But even as the clock ticked down, she couldn't shake the creeping sense that this was no ordinary confrontation. There was something personal about this war, something beyond mere conquest. Captain Alvarez, a voice broke her thoughts. It was Elias Roth, her second in command. We have a transmission from the Valkyrie. She turned, her eyes narrowing. Play. It. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the room. Earth, we have arrived. You will kneel, or the reckoning will begin. Lucille's breath caught in her throat, a warning clear and sharp. But what was the reckoning? She had heard rumors, whispers of a forgotten species, of a power lost to time. But this was real. Ayala was real. The silence in the room was oppressive, thick with uncertainty. There were no alliances to fall back on, no easy solutions. This was an enemy unlike any Earth had ever faced, and Lucille could already feel the weight of the coming battle press down on her. We're going to need to think outside the box, she said, her voice steady but resolute. Prepare for whatever comes next, but we don't let fear dictate our actions. We face this head on. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. There was no backing down now, but as Lucille turned back to the console, her gaze locked on the coordinates of the Valkyrie, so close, so terribly close. For all the preparations, for all the strategy, part of her still wondered, would humanity beg for mercy, or would they fight for their survival? The countdown had begun, and Earth's fate rested in the hands of a few, of Lucille Alvarez, and of everyone who had placed their trust in her. The Earth Command Center was abuzz with activity. Minutes turned to hours, and still the Valkyrie held its position, looming just outside the edge of the solar system. Every passing moment seemed to weigh heavier than the last, as Lucille paced before the display, her mind racing through strategies, contingency plans, anything that could give them an edge. But then came the message. It wasn't just a transmission. It was a breach, an intrusion, almost as if the Valkyrie had reached into their very systems. The holographic display flickered, then solidified into a direct image of the warship's bridge. And there, standing before them, was Ayala. She was taller than any human, her features regal, yet tinged with an air of desperation that made her seem almost out of place, like a predator trying to act the part of a queen. Her eyes, pale, almost translucent, glowed with an eerie intensity, and the surroundings of her bridge were adorned with symbols Lucille didn't recognize. Alien, archaic, yet unmistakable in their authority. Captain Alvarez. Ayala's voice rang out, cold and commanding. I have come to reclaim what is rightfully mine. Earth has no say in the matter. Lucille stood straighter, refusing to show any sign of weakness. We've never bowed to invaders. We won't start now. Ayala's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it, only cold, calculated resolve. Then you are fools, she replied. You misunderstand the stakes of this war. This is not about conquest. This is about necessity. The power you hold is the key to something much greater than you can comprehend. Something that should have been mine long ago. Lucille's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the galactic history she had studied. The Tormek, Ayala's people, were once a civilization of unimaginable power, but something had gone terribly wrong, a betrayal that had decimated them, leaving only remnants of their empire scattered across the cosmos. The Valkyrie, once thought to be a lost vessel, had somehow survived. You came to Earth to reclaim this power? Lucille asked, a bitter edge in her voice. You're threatening our world for your own gain? Ella's gaze hardened. This power is no longer mine to reclaim. It is Earth's, and it is the only way to save my people. But you will not understand. The question is simple, Captain. Will you surrender, or will you fight for what is already lost? There was a pause, an unbearable silence as the weight of Ella's words hung in the air. Lucille could see the desperation in the alien's eyes, an emotion she hadn't expected, a crack in the armor of the Valkyrie's captain. And suddenly she understood something critical. This was not just a war for dominance, it was a war for survival. Ayala was fighting for something far greater than herself, but that didn't change the fact that humanity's future hung in the balance. Lucille knew what was coming next. A conflict not just of fleets, but of ideologies. A battle not just for Earth's survival, but for the very soul of the universe itself. We will fight, Lucille replied, her voice steady. And we will not bow to you. Ayala's eyes narrowed, the tension between them palpable. Then prepare for the reckoning. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only a cold silence in its wake. Lucille turned to the room, her voice filled with determination. Prepare the fleet. We fight for Earth, and we fight for the future. The war had begun. The situation aboard Earth's command vessel was growing increasingly tense as reports flooded in. The Valkyrie had shown no signs of retreating, no overtures for peace or compromise. It was becoming clear that Ayala's declaration wasn't a bluff. The rogue warship's weapons had already disabled several smaller defense satellites in the outer reaches of the solar system, and Earth's fleet was scrambling to respond. Captain Lucille Alvarez stood in the heart of the command center, her fingers moving over the holographic displays. Every detail of the approaching conflict felt too real now, too immediate. The Valkyrie had made its intentions clear, and Earth's military was caught off guard, unable to muster an effective defense against such overwhelming firepower. In the USUC distance, the full extent of the damage was becoming evident. Earth's main defense system was compromised, leaving vast swaths of the planet vulnerable. Lucille had to make decisions that weighed heavily on her heart. Strategies to counter the alien threat, but also decisions about how far humanity would go to secure its future. Every military option she considered came with a cost. Captain, Elias Roth said, his voice sharp. We've received another transmission. The Valkyrie has moved closer to Earth's orbit. Ayala is not waiting for us to act. Lucille's eyes flickered to the screen, watching as the massive alien warship loomed ever closer, its dark presence casting a shadow over the planet's surface. She could feel it in her bones, the gravity of the moment. Earth was no longer in the position of power. What is her next move? Lucille asked, trying to mask the worry beneath her professional tone. Elias didn't hesitate. She's deploying drones, small fighters, but enough to overwhelm our outer defenses. We'll have no choice but to engage. We're already stretched thin, Lucille murmured. If we engage, it will be an all-out war. We can't afford to make a mistake. Behind her, an officer spoke up, a voice tinged with fear. Captain, we're getting reports of internal sabotage. There are factions within Earth's leadership, rogue scientists, technology firms, who've been studying Tormek technology in secret. Some of them are sympathetic to the Valkyrie. Lucille's chest tightened. Betrayal wasn't just coming from Ayla. It was festering within their own ranks. She turned to Elias, a mix of concern and resolve settling over her. We can't allow this division to cripple us. We need all the help we can get, but we can't afford to let our guard down. The tension grew heavier as time passed. It was clear that Ayla, in all her arrogance, believed that humanity would cower before her. But what she didn't understand was that Earth's will was stronger than she anticipated. Lucille's eyes lingered on the transmission from Ayla. It was a direct, unyielding message, one that held within it not just a threat, but an offer of orts, an offer that was as dangerous as it was tempting. I told you, Captain, Ayla's voice had sounded, eerily calm in its finality. There is no choice. You will either kneel, or I will unleash the reckoning. Her words rang in Lucille's mind. The reckoning. What did it truly mean? The more Lucille thought about it, the more she realized how little they understood. Ayla wasn't just waging a war. She was desperate, cornered, and convinced of Earth's complicity in a galactic betrayal that no one had ever told them about. Something ancient, something tied to the very origins of the Tormek. The moral dilemmas were mounting. Was Ayla simply a conqueror, or was she a survivor? A creature of rage and grief who had lived for centuries in the shadow of an unfathomable loss. The Tormek's defeat at the hands of a galactic coalition of species, their empire shattered, had left a mark on her that was impossible to ignore. But Lucille knew one thing for sure. Earth couldn't bend the knee. Not to anyone, not to Ayla, not to anyone who sought to impose their will through fear. She turned to Elias once again. We can't keep waiting. We need to act. It's time to make our move. Elias nodded, his face hardening. Agreed. We'll prepare the fleet for a defensive formation, but it'll take time to synchronize the attack. We'll need every ship in position. As they prepared for the inevitable clash, Lucille couldn't help but feel a growing sense of urgency. They weren't just fighting for Earth anymore. They were fighting for something much more precious, the survival of their moral code. The notion that humanity could rise above its flaws and conquer through ingenuity, not just might. In the heart of the Valkyrie, Ayla watched the preparations unfold on her own holographic display. Her emotions were a storm of conflicting desires. Anger at the betrayal her people had suffered, an overwhelming sense of duty to her lost empire, and a deep, aching need for revenge. The last remnants of the Tormek legacy were embedded in the heart of the Valkyrie, a ship that had once been a symbol of their power, and now it was a symbol of their sorrow. But the galaxy had wronged them all. The Tormek had been destroyed by the very species they once protected, by their supposed allies, and the remnants of the Tormek were scattered, cursed with knowledge of the power they had once commanded. Ayla could feel the weight of that knowledge pressing on her every thought. The Tormek had once controlled a force unlike anything the galaxy had seen, a weapon capable of reshaping the fabric of the cosmos, a weapon she believed was locked within Earth's reach. There were factions among humanity that understood this. They had studied the Tormek's technology in secret, believing that if they could unlock its secrets, they could reshape the galaxy once again. And that was the key to Ayla's plan, reclaiming that ancient power, securing it for the Tormek, and using it to rebuild their empire. But something was different now. Something had shifted within her. Perhaps it was the realization that the Tormek could never be rebuilt, or perhaps it was the knowledge that the galaxy had moved on. She had seen how humanity had thrived, how they had fought and survived and become something more than she had anticipated. And that realization, bitter as it was, had begun to take root within her heart. She had come to Earth with the intent to conquer, to restore the Tormek to their rightful place. But now, standing on the precipice of war, she wondered if perhaps humanity held something the Tormek had lost, something worth fighting for. But there was no going back now. The reckoning had begun. The conflict deepened, with Earth's fleet moving to engage the Valkyrie's drones in a series of violent skirmishes. Yet the more Lucille fought back, the more she realized that this war was about more than strategy. It was about understanding. Understanding an enemy's pain. Understanding that sometimes survival meant forging alliances with those who might have once been your enemies. The stakes grew higher, and with each passing moment, the line between right and wrong became blurrier. As the battle raged on, the future of humanity itself would be decided not just by weapons but by wisdom, by understanding, by choosing in the face of overwhelming odds, not to give up, and in that choice lay the future. The war had escalated beyond anything Lucille Alvarez had ever prepared for. The battle above Earth's orbit was a whirlwind of chaos, as the Valkyrie's drones clashed with Earth's fleet in a fierce exchange of fire and technology. Each strike, each maneuver seemed to tip the scale further into uncertainty. It wasn't just about survival anymore. The very nature of what Earth stood for, the principles that had built their empire, was now on the line. Lucille stood in the command center, her eyes locked onto the screen. There were flashes of light, explosions, and the overwhelming sound of battle all. Now it was a symbol of everything she had lost. Her heart ached with the weight of that loss. Her people, scattered to the winds, hunted to extinction by those they once protected. The galaxy had forgotten the Tormek, but she would remind them. She would take what was rightfully hers, and Earth would serve as the crucible for her empire's rebirth. But as her fingers brushed the core, a ripple of energy surged through the chamber. The artifact seemed to react to her presence, not with submission but with a warning. Ella stepped back, eyes wide, as a sudden realization gripped her. The core was not a tool for power. It was a force of nature, a force that had been buried for a reason. She had awakened something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. And in that moment, the alarms blared. Earth's fleet was attacking, and they were coming for the Valkyrie itself. Ella's heart raced. There was no turning back now. The reckoning had arrived. But was she ready to face the consequences of the power she had sought to control? Lucille's fleet moved forward with calculated precision. She knew that the stakes had never been higher. If they failed, Earth would fall. If they succeeded, they might uncover a deeper truth about the universe, about the Tormek, about their past, and about their place in the galaxy. But even as they closed in on the Valkyrie, Lucille couldn't shake the nagging feeling that victory might not come at all. Sometimes in the heart of war, there were no clear winners, just survivors. As Earth's ships engaged the Valkyrie in a desperate final stand, Lucille's thoughts turned to the choices ahead. She would do whatever it took to ensure humanity's future, even if that meant sacrificing everything. The final battle had begun. The battle was relentless, a chaotic storm of weapons fire and defiance as Earth's fleet clashed with the might of the Valkyrie. The once pristine void of space now erupted, in violent waves of energy, streaks of light, and the roaring fire of starships. But amid the madness, Lucille Alvarez stood firm, her eyes locked onto the mission at hand. The fate of Earth, and perhaps the universe, was hinging on a singular choice. The prime core was their target. It was the key to everything. The weapon that could either restore the Tormek to their former glory or unravel the very fabric of existence. They had one shot to neutralize it before Ayala could use its power to bend the galaxy to her will. Lucille's command ship was the heart of Earth's resistance, but even it was battered, its systems under constant assault. Yet, she refused to yield. She had led them this far. She wasn't about to falter now. "Report!" Lucille barked, her voice steady despite the pounding chaos outside. "Captain, we've breached the Valkyrie's outer defenses," Elias Roth said over the com. his voice tight with strain. But there's more. Several ships have already been disabled by the core's energy. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. Lucille's pulse quickened. The core's power was beyond comprehension. But if they couldn't disable it, they would lose everything. Keep pushing forward, we don't have time to waste. The fleet pushed ahead with a singular, desperate purpose. But even as they neared the Valkyrie's heart, they found themselves ensnared in the core's strange gravitational pull, an unnatural force pulling at their ships like a black hole. One by one, ships were overwhelmed, ripped from their formation, forced into the Valkyrie's grasp. Lucille watched, helpless, as one of her best captains transmitted his last message. We're too close. The core's, it's taking us and The message cut off. Another ship gone. Push forward, Lucille muttered under her breath. They couldn't afford to lose any more ships. Earth's survival was at stake, and they had only one chance to bring this conflict to a close. Meanwhile, aboard the Valkyrie, Ayla stood before the prime core, her hand hovering over the artifact. The energy surged through her like a living thing, pulsing, beckoning her to unleash its full potential. But as she prepared to activate it, her body trembled with a new fear. The core was not merely a weapon. It was a force of nature, unpredictable, uncontrollable. The vision of the ancient Tormek flooded her mind. The glory of their empire, the devastation of their fall, and the deep grief that had shaped her every action. She had thought the core would be her salvation, but now, standing before it, she realized it was far more dangerous than she could have imagined. In that moment of vulnerability, her mind returned to the one thought that had haunted her from the start. Could the Tormek ever truly be restored? Or had their time passed, leaving only ashes behind? The realization was a dagger to her soul. Ayla was fighting for more than power. She was fighting for a future that may never come. The Tormek were gone, perhaps irreparably so, just as she reached out to touch the prime core once more. Around her, but her focus was absolute. She knew every detail of the strategy, every ship's position, but the war had taken on a life of its own, chaotic, unpredictable, brutal. The enemy was not just alien, it was the embodiment of a people, betrayed, seeking to reclaim what had been lost. We've lost another satellite. Elias Roth's voice came through, strained. We can't keep up. The drones are too fast, too agile. Lucille gritted her teeth. We can't give up. I need the fleet's focus. They've underestimated us, underestimated humanity. Just as she finished speaking, a new transmission came through. It was direct, bypassing all security protocols. The voice that greeted them was familiar, but terrifying. Captain Alvarez. Ayla's cold voice filled the room, chilling and measured. I've been watching. Your resistance is admirable, but futile. I will not let you stand in the way of what must come. Lucille felt a wave of frustration surge through her, but she kept her composure. You don't understand. This war is not just for power, it's for survival, for all of us. Ayla's laugh echoed across the comms, dark and haunting. You still think you have a choice? You think humanity can choose to survive? No, Captain. You're already a casualty of this war. I am here to finish what was started long ago. The transmission cut off abruptly, but the weight of Ayla's words settled in the air like a poison. Humanity had been in a battle for its survival before, but this was different. This wasn't a fight against an invading force. It was a fight against an ideology, a belief that humanity could only rise by crushing the remnants of those who had once shaped the galaxy. Ayla didn't want Earth to survive. She wanted to remake it in her image, under her rule. Lucille's thoughts were interrupted by an explosion that rattled the ship. The lights flickered, and the console in front of her sparked with feedback. The Valkyrie's main weapon, a beam of concentrated energy, had just struck one of their outer defense lines. They were losing ground. This can't happen, Lucille muttered, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. We need to take the fight to them. Elias appeared beside her, his face grim. We're already doing everything we can. We're too outmatched. We need a new plan, Captain. Her mind raced. The longer the battle raged, the more the outcome seemed inevitable. Earth was losing. There had to be another way. But then, she remembered something. A fragment of information that had been buried under layers of military intelligence. The Valkyrie, the Tormek's ultimate weapon, was not just a ship. It was an artifact, a remnant of the Tormek's ancient power. Ella believed it was her birthright to control that power. But what if it wasn't hers to command at all? What if it was a force so ancient, so beyond comprehension, that it could change everything, not just for Earth, but for the Tormek themselves? Lucille's eyes widened with realization. "Elias," she said, turning to her second-in-command, "I need you to pull up all data on the Tormek artifacts, the ones that aren't related to combat." Elias gave her a questioning look but nodded. On it. As he worked furiously at the console, Lucille turned back to the battlefield. Her mind wasn't on the immediate threat, it was on the larger picture. Ella's desperation had driven her to a place of almost godlike arrogance. She believed she could control the very fabric of the cosmos if she could unlock the power of the Tormek. But what if that power wasn't meant to be controlled? What if it was beyond their reach? Seconds felt like hours as Elias scanned through the data. Finally, he turned back to her, his face pale. "It's here," he said, his voice almost a whisper. The Valkyrie wasn't just a warship. It's an ancient key. There's a chamber on board, the heart of the Tormek Empire. It houses the Prime Core, the artifact that Isla believes will restore her people's dominion over the universe. But it's not just a weapon. It's a force that could tear the galaxy apart if it's unleashed. Lucille's breath caught in her throat. The Prime Core. It was the key to everything, the endgame. Ayala's plan wasn't just to conquer Earth. She was after something far more destructive, something that could alter the very balance of the universe itself. "We have to destroy it," Lucille said, her voice firm. "We can't let her control it." "But how?" Elias asked, his face filled with uncertainty. "The Valkyrie is too heavily guarded. Even if we manage to board it, the artifact itself is protected by a series of failsafes. We'd be walking into a trap." Lucille's gaze hardened. "We won't walk into it. We'll strike first." In the depths of the Valkyrie, Ayla stood before the Prime Core, her hands trembling as she approached the artifact. The chamber was dark, save for the pulsing glow of the core, an otherworldly energy that hummed with ancient power. The Tormek had once harnessed its energy to dominate the stars. But the explosion rocked the ship. Lucille's ship tore through the final line of defense, and with a skillful maneuver, they slammed into the heart of the Valkyrie, its hull shaking violently as the energy from the core surged through the walls. The time had come. "Prepare the boarding team," Lucille ordered, her voice sharp, unwavering. "We're going in." The docking bay doors opened, and a squad of soldiers, led by Lucille herself, prepared for the final push. Their mission was clear: destroy the core and end the war. But as they infiltrated the Valkyrie's dark corridors, Lucille couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the victory she sought might not be as simple as they had hoped. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and the closer they got to the core, the more dangerous the enemy became. Ayla had retreated into the heart of the ship, waiting, determined to see her mission through. Lucille's team fought their way toward the core chamber, every step weighed with the knowledge that humanity's future was on the line. With every explosion, every shot fired, it felt like the universe itself was fighting back against them, as though it wanted to punish them for defying the inevitable. And yet, Lucille pressed on. They had come this far. Earth had already paid too high a price to surrender now. Ella stood before the core, watching as Lucille and her team closed in on her. The time had come. She had no illusions now. There was no victory to be had. Earth's resistance was too strong. Humanity's will was too powerful, but it was not too late to make a choice. Her heart thundered in her chest as she made her decision. With a final defiant look at the core, Ayala pressed the activation sequence. The core trembled, a force like an earthquake reverberating through the very walls of the ship. But in that moment, Lucille and her team arrived. The chamber door burst open and Lucille's eyes locked onto Ayala's. There was no hatred in her gaze, just the understanding of a woman who had fought too long and too hard to let a war destroy her world. "Ayala!" Lucille shouted, her voice steady. "It doesn't have to end like this. Let it go." Ella's trembling hand hovered over the core. "I can't," she whispered. "I fought for this. For them. For the Tormek." Lucille's voice softened, a tone of empathy, cutting through the tension. "The Tormek are gone. You fought for something that was lost. But you don't have to destroy everything to bring them back." The silence that followed was deafening. Ayala's gaze flickered to the core, then to Lucille. For the first time, she seemed to see the human captain not as an enemy but as a mirror, a reflection of the desperation and grief that had driven her to this point. With a shaky breath, Ayala withdrew her hand from the core, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't know if I could stop it. I didn't know if I could live with myself if I didn't try." Lucille nodded, her expression filled with a rare, shared understanding. "We all carry that burden, but there are other ways to fight. There's still a chance for all of us." With the core deactivated, the imminent destruction of the galaxy was averted. The silence that followed was more profound than any battle cry. The war was over. Earth had survived. But both Lucille and Ayala knew this moment, this fragile peace, was just the beginning of a new chapter. The war had ended, but the cost was not yet fully understood. Earth had been spared, and the Valkyrie's power had been neutralized. Yet, the Tormek's tragic legacy still loomed large in the hearts of those who had witnessed their fall. And Ayala, now a prisoner of her own grief, had been taken back to Earth for trial. But Lucille Alvarez knew that this was not the end. It was merely the pause before the next challenge. Earth's victory over the Valkyrie had sent a ripple through the galaxy. The surviving factions of the Tormek had been watching, waiting. As Lucille stood on the balcony of the Earth Command Center, watching the stars once more, a new transmission came through, one that no one had expected. A fleet, far off in the distance, appeared on the edge of their sensors, not enemies but potential allies. A voice echoed through the comms, calm and steady. "We are the remnants of the Tormek. We seek a new path." Lucille's gaze darkened with the realization that the galaxy was far from settled. The old order was gone, but the new world would be shaped by those who dared to build it. Humanity's place in the cosmos had been solidified, but the future, uncertain as it was theirs to forge. And Lucille would face it, not as a soldier, but as a leader. The future of the galaxy was wide open and no one knew what lay beyond the horizon. But whatever came next, Earth would be ready. For the reckoning was over. But the new chapter had just begun.